Week. With that, we'll bring on our friend Amanda Christovich from Front Office Sports. And my, oh my, Amanda, the world would never stops, does it, here with all the stuff going on in the college sports world, huh?
It never stops. And the Final Four, the CFP National Championship, no postseason appears to stop it either.
No, you were down at the title game in Atlanta on Monday, won by Ohio State. You wrote something yesterday kind of about, I guess we'd call it the professionalization, right, of college sports, and how this high-level sports stuff, it's in a weird spot right now. Like, they are pros, they're not pros, they're in college. Where's this going? Because it seems to be stuck in a weird place right now that the puzzle pieces don't quite fit anymore.
100%. I mean, I think, so the story I wrote yesterday was essentially just what I kept thinking all weekend. And, so I arrived in Atlanta Friday evening, had several beverages with a colleague who lives in Atlanta, which may be a few too many. But starting Saturday morning, it was like nonstop. You have media day, which is and a fan fest. The fans come and watch media day. The whole team is there, right? And then Sunday you have coaches' press conferences. There's other media obligations, especially for TV stations. There was a college football playoff board of managers meeting that several reporters and I had a bit of like a stakeout, essentially. And then the game, which was, a full day of corporate pregame festivities, and then the game itself, which was in an NFL stadium of 77,000 people. And it's been this way for a few years, but you add a 12-team playoff, which now looks more like an NFL postseason than a college football postseason, right? And you add the fact that there's all this extra revenue coming in because of that expanded playoff. And it's like, we're still calling these kids amateurs? Like, I was in an NFL stadium, like... And I was sitting there going, I mean, man, like, I couldn't stop thinking about it, right? The players are getting money through NIL deals. We've talked about the House settlement that if it's approved, they're going to get revenue sharing. But the NCAA and its administrators are so obsessed with this idea of the players still being amateurs, even though the entire sport is like, essentially the NFL, a smaller version of the NFL, or a version of the NFL with better mascots, in my opinion. And and the players they want to pay the players. So I couldn't get over this sort of identity crisis that I feel like was extremely apparent at this national title game.
Yeah, and it grows and grows by the day. And, you referenced a tweet of an article that I also read the other day. We have Brian Curtis of The Ringer on every now and again, and he wrote an article the other day about the idea that, like, if you used to cover college football, and by used to in like the olden days of like 3 years ago or 5 years ago, like you needed to know the coaches, and now you need to know you better know the ADs or the presidents or the people in the boardroom, right? That like they are the power brokers in the sport now, not the Nick Sabans or whoever's in that position anymore.
Yeah, 100%. I read. I was there when Brian was reporting his article at that stakeout, and everything he wrote was true. It's just I guess it was like it's been an interesting experience for me personally because I started covering college sports full time in July of 2020, which, as Brian rightly pointed out in his article, was really kind of when this sort of shift in the beat happened. So, like, for me, it's all I know, right? I've never worked in on the journalism side of college sports, at least at a time when the coaches had all the power. For me, not only is it, the folks you mentioned, but there's also, it's almost like politics. It's like there are these sort of fixers and PR people and sort of folks who their names aren't anywhere ever, but they're the ones kind of controlling a lot of the flow of information. And it's, it's very interesting how it feels more and more like covering Congress, I think, would feel than covering a professional or even, the previous iteration of college sports.
And then I guess it makes sense, as Amanda Christovich of Front Office Sports is our guest, that Congress and all this is now heavily involved in college sports, or is going to need to be, like the crossover.
Exactly. So the skills are transferable, as I'm told.
Yes, apparently. You need to know both worlds to make 1 + 1 of it these days. And, last week the big story was that, all these schools are getting ready. I know Kirby Holcutt of Texas Tech was kind of the first AD to put it out there, but many others were echoing. It's like, all right, here's how we're going to break down this $20 million payment that we're going to be able to do to the players, and it's a significant chunk of football, then men's basketball, then women's basketball, then pick if your school's a baseball school or up here lacrosse or whatever, they'd be kind of next in line. And the Department of Education, like in the waning days of the administration last week, is like, about that, no, you got to use Title IX and everything's got to be equitable. Where are we at on this? Do we think this is going to happen? And how much has this really put a screeching halt to what all these schools were preparing to do?
I think in the moment, it definitely caused some panic, and rightfully so, because you don't have to be a legal expert to know that, if anything an athletic department does has to follow a federal statute governing gender equity. I just was amazed at the chutzpah, the audacity of these athletic directors and coaches who were so confident that they were going to be able to give their football players 75% of the revenue, knowing that Title IX exists. However, obviously the Biden administration, put out that memo or the FAQ, and then the following day, of course, while I was on the plane to Atlanta and had to cover this from the air, put out a letter sort of almost like reiterating that Title IX was going to apply to these revenue sharing payments as if they were scholarship money or financial aid. But when there was like a little media scrum with Notre Dame's athletic director, and he seems like remarkably calm about it. And I think that's probably going to be I think he was calm because most athletic directors and folks in the know are expecting the Trump administration to either reverse this interpretation and retract it, or just ignore it. The first Trump administration was really well known for not enforcing Title IX at all. There were some things they changed, regulations they loosened, but ultimately even the regulations they didn't change, they just weren't really enforced. So I think that a lot of athletic directors right now are being told, you know what, why don't you just continue with the plan that you had? Because even if Trump and his Department of Education doesn't change these regulations, it's possible they just might ignore them.
It also seems about right that the McMahon family is involved in the Department of Education now, so we can just add the wrestling into it too to make it all make a lot of sense. I wonder here, Title IX turned 50. What was it? 2 years ago? It was 1972, I think, when it went into effect. And obviously, it's a hugely important law for a lot of reasons. Like, we wouldn't have women's sports in this country the way we do right now without it. That's a no-brainer statement. How much do you think it does apply here? Because so much of what you read about Title IX is about the opportunity, right? The opportunity's still there, right? I don't know if this files under opportunity. That's where I wonder here, because you look at where the revenue's coming in, and they want to give it to football because that's where the revenue's coming from. I wonder if these things are in theory coming from the same place or not.
Yeah, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but here's my understanding. It's opportunity, but it's also resources. So technically, if you are a school where your men's basketball team plays in an NBA arena and your women's basketball team plays in a much smaller on-campus gym, you are in violation of Title IX.
Of which there are multiple schools like that.
Including my alma mater of Georgetown. So I'll just call them out, right? Technically, that's a violation of Title IX. Now, are those, sort of minute, detail-oriented violations enforced? No, they're not. But resources is something that is looked at when it comes to Title IX. So then the question becomes, how do you define proportionate or equitable resources, right? The way the current Department of Education did it was they said that revenue sharing payments count as athletic financial aid. And the rule with athletic financial aid, because it's financial aid, it means it kind of, unless it has to be proportionate to the number of athletes that are playing men's and women's sports, right? So if you have 500 female athletes, you better have 500 scholarship opportunities, give or take a few based on some other sort of extenuating factors. If they were to interpret it a different way and say it's not financial aid, it's a benefit based on the budget of the team, right? So it's like every team has to give 20% of their revenue in revenue sharing, right? Then it's like equitable but not equal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But that's not how this DOE defined it. They defined it as athletic financial aid, and with financial aid, it doesn't matter how much money a team makes. You have to offer the same opportunities for everybody. So it'll be interesting to see if that changes under Trump.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating how that plays out, because I know a lot of schools are like, okay, maybe we don't have as much NIL from donors, but at least here we can do something. Like if you then have to split it up amongst all your teams evenly, that's not going to be. It's a completely different thing, I guess, is what the end result of what people thought it was going to be.
Right, and on the one hand, people are saying, well, the football players and the men's basketball players deserve the lion's share of the revenue because they generate it. And that's true and fair if we're looking at this as a business. But again, there's that contradiction, that identity crisis of college sports and athletic departments, especially in Division I, are now big business. And yet, legally, they are classified as educational institutions, right? Literal non-profits. So if you want to split up the revenue based on who makes the most money, that's fine. But then you're no longer a nonprofit and your players are no longer amateurs. You see where I'm going with this?
Mm-hmm.
So they just have to decide. They just have to decide what they want to be, right? And I mean, they may not have the choice to decide. A court could decide for them, but it's like you can't have it both ways. You're either an educational institution pooling all your money to offer equal opportunity, or you admit that you're a big business and you pay the players who generate the revenue what they're worth.
And pay taxes, too, which would be another thing on top of it, too. That would be even bigger money to talk about down the line, as we got Amanda Christovich with us. And, we've talked before about the idea of unionization and all that. I see a lot of fans like, can there be a cap on NIL? Because there's so much money going around. Like, the answer is probably no, right? Unless there's some kind of collective bargaining or something. It doesn't feel like we're anywhere near something like that.
Right. I mean, look, under U.S. labor law, a cap on earnings is, considered like price fixing, and it's illegal in this country unless you have a union and, in this case, like a quote unquote league entity that collectively bargain and agree, and all parties, including the employees, agree to it. So you're 100% correct. Even the House settlement with the cap of, the revenue sharing cap, some are saying could be challenged because even though it's like a settlement agreement, it still might not be legal if it's not collectively bargained. But then it also could be legal because no one's forced to opt into the settlement, so it's only the player. That's a little dicey. Mm-hmm. But what I'll point to is a memo that came out, or I guess it was a court filing that came out in the midst of all this Title IX stuff, and also while I was on the plane to Atlanta, which was from Biden's Department of Justice, saying that they believed that the House revenue sharing cap would be an antitrust violation and would be illegal because there's no collective bargaining. And as a result, they actually formally asked Judge Wilkin to not approve the settlement, or at least amend that portion of it. So that's just another sort of confounding factor, I guess you could say, in this attempt to regulate the market for college athletes without calling them employees.
It is the never-ending story here. That is nowhere near wherever it's getting to. That's for sure. All right, Amanda. What's next for you? What should we be looking out for here in the next couple weeks?
Oh gosh, what's next for me? Well, speaking of the DOE and DOJ, I am going to be checking in with all my sources in Congress over the next couple weeks. I mean, I also cover the transgender athletes and women's sports question. So if there is an executive order on that or any more action in the Senate, I'll be covering that. I will be covering any, future. I've heard some things. I don't have anything specific to report yet, but I'm expecting some sort of movement, at least from a lobbying perspective in Congress, about college athlete unionization efforts or just, athletes' rights, some sort of NIL bill. All of that is going to be kind of my main focus until March Madness.
All right.
So we'll see.
All right. Fascinating times. There's always something. All right, Amanda, thanks so much as always. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, there she is, Amanda Christovich. Check out all of her stuff from all this sports business perspective, which, man, oh, man, there's always something.